Information tonight about the botched execution attempt of Tennessee death row inmate Tony Carruthers. It's raising new questions about who the state chooses to carry out death sentences. Steve Mailing dug into a new court filing to learn more.
After the state called off the execution of Tony Carruthers Thursday morning, new details are emerging about the process and the people involved in carrying out death sentences in Tennessee. A new filing in federal court includes the deposition of the doctor tasked with starting IV lines for executions. In that testimony, the doctor said they had not placed a central line in 13 years and do not have hospital privileges in Tennessee.
If the state of Tennessee is going to execute its own, there has to be full and complete transparency, and there was no transparency here, and this botched execution showed why there must be.
Attorney Maria Deliberato previously pointed to older litigation, saying the same doctor testified under oath that they were not qualified to do a central line.
There was previous litigation in which that doctor gave in a sworn deposition that he was not qualified to do a central line.
But the transcript filed in this new case does not say that the doctor is not qualified, only that they had not performed a central line in more than a decade. Deliberato says she asked inside the execution chamber if the doctor was qualified and was told yes. We checked state records. They show the doctor has an active Tennessee medical license with no disciplinary action from the board.
That is shameful on the part of the state of Tennessee.
This comes as a Davidson County Chancery Court judge has ordered the Department of Corrections to preserve evidence from the failed execution. It also follows an investigation just 3 years ago into the state's execution procedures, leaving some to wonder if Governor Lee will again re-examine Tennessee's lethal injection protocol. Steve Mailing, WSMV4.
We reached out to the State Department of Corrections to ask about the execution process and the qualifications for the medical staff they use. We've not heard back. Tennessee's next scheduled execution is August 13th for Anthony Hines. Krista Pike is then set to be put to death September 30th. She's the only woman on death row in Tennessee. And Gary Wayne Sutton is scheduled to be executed December 3rd.